Welcome to another episode of How I Discovered My Gift with yours truly, David D. Simons. I am joined here by an amazing person, entrepreneur, leader, teacher, and someone I consider a friend. I'm excited, delighted, and energized to share with you guys this amazing man who I've known for some years, Dr. Phil Lewis. He's an investor. He's the owner and operator of the Carthage Investment Group, headquartered, I believe, in upstate New York. And they do some amazing things. So you'll hear more about that later. But I've just grown to observe and learn from a distance just how Dr. Phil operates as a person, how he treats his wife, just the demeanor he is. He's always sharp. He's witty. He's just an all-around great guy. Somebody you meet and you automatically admire. So you guys will get to peer into his world, some of the wisdom he's going to share with you. So, Dr. Phil, thank you so much for being on the show. Truly an honor.
Hey, David, thank you for having me. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you having me on. I have appreciated our friendship and truly amazed at your success. You're really doing a bang-up job.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So I'd like to dig in right from the beginning in your journey, Dr. Phil. Just take us through, from your childhood to today, and the path that you took to get to where you are today.
Sure. Well, I think the major thing is to, I am a product of a hardworking, faithful African-American family. My parents, my mom's family moved from South Central Virginia to Pittsburgh in the 1920s, part of the Great Migration. And my father's family were from the West Indies. His father was from St. Thomas. His mother's from Barbados. And I think I must have been around 12 or 13 when I heard her complain that she thought his family were really Puerto Ricans who were passing for people from St. Thomas. And she was really upset about that. At any rate, the thing for me was that both of my parents were hardworking. They were smart. They were, as most Black families, very concerned about raising their children in a way that encouraged them to be successful and almost to not even be aware of the kind of racism that surrounded us. And I have to admit, it worked so well that I remember when I was in high school, we were walking to downtown Washington, D.C., a bunch of Black fellas and I, and one of them yelled at a white guy across the street, "Hey, honky, go home." And I said, "Oh, man, don't treat him like that," right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So the other piece of that is that my dad was a cryptographer. He was was in the Signal Corps in the Army, and so he was responsible for handling classified messaging in the Pentagon, which was his last duty station. And his work was so secret that he never told me what he did. It wasn't until I was in ROTC in a military science class, and I figured out what Dad did. And I came home and said, "Dad, I know you're a cryptographer." And he just smiled. He never said anything else. He just smiled and let that go. And then my mom.
For those that don't know, what is a cryptographer?
Oh, yeah. A cryptographer is a person who both creates and breaks codes for communications. So all the secret codes that were used during World War II, or in any wars, right? But particularly during World War II, the Korean War, and on, my dad was involved in both creating and decrypting codes. So that's what a cryptographer does, more or less. It's a lot of mathematics, really, trying to figure things out, and that stood me well, right? Because I love math and science, and actually at the time that I was leaving high school, I was trying to decide between going to med school or law school. And what really pushed me toward med school was that I was so much better in science than I thought I was at literature or writing or that sort of thing. So, and a lot of that came from Dad.
Love that. Love that. So you were telling us about your mom as well.
Yeah. Well, her parents, as I said, moved from South Central Virginia, the area around Martinsville, Danville. And they were light enough to pass. And I think it particularly, though her father was the darkest of his siblings. And I think it really angered them, the kind of racism that there was in Virginia. And so they moved to Pittsburgh, worked in the steel mills, worked hard, but bought land outside of Pittsburgh. And that land developed into a company that has now eventuated into Carthage Investment. So it was really her parents and their investment that eventuated into Carthage. My mom was a nurse. She was one of the first nurses to agree to work for Planned Parenthood in Pittsburgh in the 50s. And it wasn't until I found an article about that, actually probably about 10 years ago, that I realized how radical a move that was. But both of them were about being successful, being good Christians, taking care of your family. That family was important. They were both about that.
Mm. Beautiful, beautiful. And I can see those qualities in you. And so when you, it's kind of like you're a blend of both your mother and your father, just from hearing a little bit about them, and from obviously the mathematical mind and the skill set you'd have to have being a cryptographer, and then the medical approach that your mom as a nurse, and so they obviously sounds like had an influence on your life. So talk to me about now this journey from childhood into, going into college. You said you decided to go down this route of the medical route, where you could have also equally gone to, I imagine, engineering or even the legal route. So talk to us through there about the development into your career world.
Well, yeah. I started in college as a pre-med, thinking that I might want to go to med school, but I wasn't sure. I had taken in high school what would have been in that day equivalent to an AP chemistry course. And so I really enjoyed chemistry and physics. And indeed, I was trying to decide really between medicine and law. And but because I really enjoyed science and math more, medicine seemed to make more sense to me. Also because I was in college in the 60s, and the idea of being a physician and being able to help the Black community was, a big thing in my mind. So much so that I'll never forget. Once I got to Johns Hopkins as a freshman medical student, and they had an assistant professor of pediatrics come and talk to our class. So this is 120 young minds just got to Hopkins, right? And he said, he looks out and he says, "How many of you are here because you want to make money?" I didn't think anyone would raise their hand, but 3 or 4 people did. I thought that was outlandish, but okay, fine. How many are here because you want to help people. So I'm raising my hand. So he says, how many people are here just because you just like thinking about the human body? You just enjoy thinking about the human body. 3 people raised their hand. And he said, those 3 should stay. The rest of you should leave. And the point that he was making was that it takes so much energy to be a physician, just to become a physician, but then to be a physician, that if you're not just loving it, you need to go do something else. And but thankfully for me, I found epidemiology as a route in medicine that made sense to me, which is highly mathematical. It's basically based on statistics and trying to understand the occurrence of illness and injury based on statistics. And it is part of that second half of medicine, preventive medicine. It's about how do you keep people well, keep them from being injured, from being ill to begin with. So that's been my career. I've really enjoyed it. And that's how I made the transition basically from high school through to my career in medicine.
So how long did you spend in the
epidemiology? Yeah, that's not an easy thing. In fact, I tell people all the time now that most of my life I've had to explain what an epidemiologist is, except during the pandemic, right at the beginning, the New York Times had an article that said, epidemiologists rock. So ever since then, it's been not so bad. But yeah, I mean, the route for me and the interest for me in epidemiology, as I said, is really about keeping people well. And it actually blends into this whole thought that I then developed by God's grace, this idea of enlightened capitalism. Mm-hmm. Because, in fact, the Nash equilibrium, and for your listeners who have not seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, it's worth seeing, if nothing else, for the bar scene. And there you can go on YouTube now and just type in the bar scene from Beautiful Mind, and it will come up. And what's important about this is that it is of course, a dramatized account of how John Nash came up with the idea for the Nash equilibrium, which is the mathematical underpinning for sustainable development, for enlightened capitalism. Those are basically synonymous terms. And he won the Nobel Prize for this. And the essence of it is that raw capitalism that's described in Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, that assumes that wealth is generated by each person being left to do what God has given them talents and interests to do. And by doing that, people produce a surplus of high quality services and products, and that generates trade and increased wealth for the community as a whole. Enlightened capitalism and the Nash equilibrium say that, in fact, the greatest wealth is generated when I or any individual economic entity does what's in its best interest and the community's best interest simultaneously. Now, that just happens to sound like the second most important commandment when the lawyer asked Jesus what was important. And Jesus said, love God with all your heart and with all your mind and with all your might. And then he said, love your neighbor as yourself. It's no accident that those things say, in fact, the same thing. So, and indeed, I mean, a part of my work in epidemiology has led into exactly that same train of thought.
Wow. That's awesome. So your work in sorry, I hear a little echo.
Epidemiology, yes, yeah, okay.
Yes, your work in that realm.
Yeah.
and the combination in the financial realm. How did
Yeah.
the two merge and collide?
Well, first because I did a combined MD and Master's of Public Health program while I was in med school. And then I left. I went to Walter Reed. I did my internship and residency in preventive medicine. I was chief of preventive medicine down at Fort Hood. I was a young captain in a colonel slot. So I got a lot of experience that I would not otherwise ever had seen for like 10, 15 years or more in my career. I then went back to Hopkins. I did a fellowship in occupational environmental medicine with a concentration on immune reactions in the skin. So I was combining dermatology and occupational environmental medicine. And so the professor I was working with and I were doing some consulting work for a consortium of chemical companies that were having problems with immune reactions in the skin to acrylates. And most people, that won't mean anything to them, but anyone who knows about nail salons, the chemical that's generally used to put nails on is methyl methacrylate. And so when I went to Roman Haas to deliver some of this data, they said, gee, would you be interested in coming to be an associate corporate medical director? And I had never thought about that. I thought I was going to stay and teach at Hopkins. But around that time, the research grants from NIH were becoming harder to get. And I thought, okay, I'll go to Roman Haas, which was in Philadelphia, and I'll stay there for a couple of years. I'll continue to teach down at Hopkins. I'll collect some data, and then I'll come back to the Hopkins and teach full time. Well, I got here, and promotions came along, and the kids got settled, and I was making a lot of money, and most importantly, relative to what we're talking about, I was vice president for environmental health, safety, and sustainable development for Roman Haas. Roman Haas was probably the fourth or fifth largest chemical company in the United States at the time. It was a multinational. And so I had an opportunity to see how business was run. And to learn, because part of the thing I had to do was to staff one of the committees for the board. And so I got to see how all this worked. And so all of a sudden, it was easy then to translate that combined with the other things I was doing and to saying, well, wait a minute, I can help our family company make the jump to light speed here. So Dow bought Roman Haas in 2009, and they paid a $34 a share premium to do it, which meant I had a lot of money that I hadn't expected. So I took all that money, plowed it back into our family company, and shifted us from real estate.
If you don't mind, could you share what Dow bought Roman Haas for? What's the amount that they?
Yeah, sure. Dow was particularly good at producing large volume industrial chemicals, but Roman Haas was very good and specific at what was called specialty chemicals. So, for instance, it would produce chemicals for the electronics industry, for making motherboards for computers and that sort of thing, and a lot of very specialized areas, right? And so Dow wanted Roman Haas in order to help Dow make the transition to maintaining its industrial chemical base, but to be more agile and more customer facing and better at specialty chemicals. So that's why they were interested in Roman Haas.
And what was do you remember the purchase amount? What Dow paid to get to buy, or a rough estimate?
I don't remember the number. I'd have to look it up. I do remember the premium on the shares was $34 a share. And in fact, the tragedy to it all really was that it didn't work out the way Dow had intended, because they actually got into a bidding war with BASF. BASF, as I recall, had cash. Dow was depending on money that they were getting from a deal with the Kuwaitis. The Kuwaitis backed out, and they were some billions of dollars short. And they had signed a non-rescind contract to buy Roman Haas. So there was a time at which Roman Haas was actually worth more than Dow, because the Roman Haas share price was $78 a share when the Dow share price had sunk to like $6 a share. So I don't think it ever resulted in the kind of growth that Dow intended. And the same thing happened when they acquired DuPont, because if you look, they've now respun out into at least two different companies. It might be three, but I'd have to go back and look. Yeah. So Dow's been down a rough road. And in fact, I mean, even at the time, the chemical industry was not the best industry in terms of stock performance to be involved in. And in fact, the only reason Roman Haas was up on the block at all was that the Haas family, who owned 34% of the stock, decided they were willing to sell. And until then, it wasn't going to be up on the block.
Interesting. Gotcha. So you're, sorry, I interrupted you. You were saying that you now, working at Roman Haas, you're a VP, and you are now partaking in this opportunity. It sounds like a once in a lifetime kind of move, like as you're sharing, that Dow is purchasing Roman Haas. So now this influx of cash, and you said, okay, what are you going to do with this? And you put it into the family business.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, talk to us about that and how that whole process. And
it is Carthage was technically known as a family office, which means all of the money invested is family members. So it's not open, to just anyway. But, so the issue then was that I had to sit down with my brothers, my cousins, my relatives who were all invested, and say, hey, okay, we've got this additional money. These are some ideas. What do you think? So we all talked it through and agreed. So as I said, we moved away from real estate into a much larger portfolio, so that 70% of our holdings are in Fortune 500 companies, from Apple, Microsoft, United Healthcare, et cetera, right? But 30% are in startups. And we very specifically look for startups that will fit within an enlightened capitalist approach, because we view that those will have the greatest return over time. So, for instance, one of the groups that we're invested in is Global Neighbor Incorporated. And they use visible light from the blue wavelengths part of the visible spectrum and the red part, along with artificial intelligence, to be able to kill weeds and weed seeds, so that you can substantially improve the profitability of organic farming. And it is an essential part of what's called regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture is where you don't even have to plow the ground. You use animals to help fertilize the ground and rotate that with crops, so that you're actually drawing CO2 down into the soil. And in fact, it's been estimated if 1% of the currently farmed land in the world was changed each year into regenerative agriculture, we would reverse climate change within 20 years.
Wow.
With no change in the use of fossil fuels.
Really?
Yeah, really. So And so so that's an example of one of the companies we're involved in. Another one, proven, is a group that use blockchain technology to allow folks who are in the gig economy to easily house their own human resource records. So they can instantly switch from one company to another. And they have full control over their lives.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's 30%. The startup, you said 70% is the Fortune 500 element.
Yes.
And I'm just so intrigued by this because this is a family-owned investment group. Your mother started, and you were carrying along, and I imagine you're going to keep it going and for perpetuity. So, how I'm just asking the questions that I'm thinking listeners would ask listening to this interview. How did you guys keep the organization and separate family and business? Or do you have, like this is we're dealing with money, livelihood. We're dealing with, things. You got to look at things from an investor angle. You got to take emotions and all that. How do you guys operate and obviously you've been able to do this for a long time. How do you maintain that?
Well, it's first by the grace of God, to tell you the truth, literally, right? Because my cousins and my brothers and I often marvel that we have always gotten along so well. I cannot remember any time over our entire lives that we actually had a fight. Yeah, I know. It's one of those things. I can remember watching TV shows or movies or reading literature where family wasn't getting along, and I thought, what is that? How does that happen? Right? So that's one thing. We've always gotten along. The other thing is that everything's open. Anybody can look at anything anytime they want. We try to make sure that the teams that are looking at new acquisitions, that all of the partners have an opportunity to be involved. Anyone can be involved if they'd like. And we entertain suggestions from anyone. So one of my nephews, in fact, suggested that we invest in Tesla. Even though I teach environmental medicine down at Penn, and I had some reports from one of the residents that Tesla had a really terrible environmental health and safety record, that they particularly were not very good on safety. And so I wasn't really up for investing in Tesla, but because our nephew suggested it, and then we have an analytical model that we agree with that combines both a short and a long-term evaluation of companies and produces a weighted score. And so once a company gets above what we consider a threshold for investment, then we'll consider them. And Tesla was well above. So even though I didn't think it was a good idea, because our nephew thought it was a good idea and it had met the cut, we invested. And we've done it exceedingly well, as Tesla has done well. However, it is also at the point where we're reconsidering, because Elon Musk has turned out to have what I call the Steve Jobs problem, right? Because you're good in one thing, you think you can do everything. And his thing with Twitter was just a really bad move. He's really taking his eye off the ball. So we'll see. But it is our openness, our willingness to have everyone involved. But I think it's the fact that, and this was an important aspect, particularly for my mom, that family was important.
Wow. Respect. So how can one get started with such an endeavor, creating their own private family investment group? What would you what does somebody need to have to get that started and get that going?
Well, yeah, the first thing I encourage people to do is to have a good life plan for themselves. And that should include 5 segments: metaphysical, relational, intellectual, physical, and financial. You should have a plan that includes all 5 of those areas and ways to develop across all 5 of those areas. Because it's important to recognize that money will not solve problems in your life, really. Everyone thinks if I just had $1 million, that'd be great. Not true. Because first thing, no matter how much money you have, you can outspend what you bring in. Second thing, the more money you have, the more likely it is people are going to be asking you for things, particularly folks in your family. Mm-hmm. So you have to have a balanced approach to life. And I say to people all the time, you can be Muslim, Jewish, agnostic, atheist, whatever. I highly recommend Christianity as the best answer to the metaphysics, to be able to give you a clear view of how the world is put together, how you fit in, how you figure out where you're going. And then to be able to look at money as what it is, a tool and a gift. Mm-hmm. So that's number one, have a good life plan. Number two, know the following percentages and discipline around money. You give away 10% of more of any cash that comes your way. And there's a technical term, cash flow, right? Mm-hmm. So that's any money that's coming your way. Mm-hmm. Simplistically, right? Right. You give 10% or more away. You invest 50% or more, and you spend 40% or less. The importance to that is that your assets are always growing quicker than what you're spending. And over time, the amount that you have to spend is going up, but you're never caught short. Next, investing does not mean put the money in a bank. The only thing, and I have a lot of friends who work for banks, fairly major banks, Goldman Sachs, etc. Banks are good for liquidity, money that you need to immediately pay bills, or you need some cash immediately. That's it. Investing means putting your money, at the very least, in a equity-based fund that mirrors the S&P 500. And if you're relatively conservative, you can split it 75% that way and 25% in a bond fund, right? That way, your assets are growing on average somewhere between 8 to 12% a year, which far outstrips the 0.2% the bank is going to give you. And that's where you ought to start until you have $1 million or more to invest. Because it's only once you get above that level that you have enough to be able to diversify well enough so that if something goes out, you're not hurt.
Mm. That's gold. If you don't mind me asking, you can answer or not answer. Where did the fund start as far as the capacity it could hold as from the starting, and where is the fund been at its highest, or where is the fund today, if that's the same answer, from a perspective? I just want to kind of give listeners a possibility of what's possible.
Well, okay. I am restricted by our family for discussing the worth of our holdings.
Absolutely.
given what I've said, you can assume it's more than $1 million, and I can tell you it's much more than that, right? So that's we'll just say that. And what was the other part of your question?
Yeah, where did it start? Like how?
Oh,
Like,
where did it start?
like yeah.
It started from my mother's parents buying land outside of Pittsburgh, and even and it was astounding. I think it must have been when I was in med school sometime that I finally realized how outrageous that was. Here these were people who had been sharecroppers in South Central Virginia, and they're smart enough to understand that they need to invest. And they invest in some land, and it's that land that was the basis for Carthage.
Wow. So that land was sold and then put into the fund? Or,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And I imagined they sold the land because land is always ever increasing in value. So they sold it at a good time in value. Okay.
Yeah. And although the important thing is that real estate is tricky, right? You have to really know what you're doing. Now, my youngest daughter, if she hears this podcast, will quickly raise her hand and say, well, I told Dad to get more into real estate. But keep in mind that real estate, most real estate appreciates at about 3 to 4% a year. As opposed to, remember, I said just an equity S&P 500 mirroring fund will grow at 8 to 12, right?
Right.
Now, there's no question because my daughter wanted us to buy some brownstones in Brooklyn, in Brooklyn, because she was sure that market was going to take off. And I didn't think she was right. Well, she was right. And it far exceeded, right? So, yeah, we should have. But we still invest in real estate, but it's got to be the right thing.
Got you. So, distilling all of this, when you think about your dominant gift, Dr. Phil, what is your dominant gift?
I think my dominant gift is a rational mind and being able to understand the importance of routine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, see, it dawned on me some time ago. God has created the world so that most of it runs on these endless routines, and on one level, they would seem to be boring, but they are the essence of life, right? Whether it's how the oceans, waves come in and out, how the tide moves, how the planets are in their orbits, all just routine, right? So part of I like to call myself an effector machine, right? So I make a plan, I know what I want to do, and I follow it out. So my usual day, I get up at 6 o'clock, I say my prayers, I go to the gym, I'm in the gym at 8 o'clock. My workout routine is about 110 minutes. I do about 40 to 55 minutes of weights, about 55 minutes of cardio, and about 10 minutes of stretching. Then I head out, I run some errands, and I come back to the office here, and I'm working from about 1 or 2 o'clock till about 6:30 or 7. And my wife and I kick back for a couple hours, watch the news, watch some TV, that sort of stuff. Lights are out at 10:30. That's it. Sunday, I do not go to the gym. I go to church. And interestingly, I read in a CIA report that there are 38,000 different denominations of Christianity. But most Christians in the world are either Roman Catholic, and the next greatest number are Anglican / Episcopalians. Right?
Mm.
And so my family were Episcopalian, and I grew up in the Episcopal tradition. And one of the things that the Episcopal tradition has is the Book of Common Prayer. So it has devotionals for morning, noon, evening, and then there's a form called Compline before you go to bed. So I use the morning prayer when I'm on the elliptical runner, when I'm working out, and use it other times during the day. Mm-hmm. So that's worked for me. But as I said, on Sunday we go to church, and we alternate between the Episcopal Church, and Gail still likes non-denominationals. So right now I think it's Change Church.
Okay.
Yeah.
Darius.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So we hang out there, and so yeah.
Love it. So you've had this gifting of this you said the rational mind, like, so this routine, discipline kind of attitude you've had since a child.
It's interesting. I don't know when it started, right? It was one of those things. That's why whenever people say they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, I'm saying, wait a minute. Your dad existed. Your mom existed. People took care of you when you couldn't take care of yourself. No one does this on their own. That's just crazy. So to try to understand how I came about is tough. But you touched on the fact that I'm the oldest of my siblings. Mm-hmm. And there's no question that my mom and dad had like most firstborn, had a great impact on me. So my dad was very organized, right? And so I suppose I got that from him. But at what age it actually clicked in, I don't remember. Because I certainly had times when I wasn't organized. So I can't tell you how old it was. But certainly by the time I was in high school, it started kicking in. Yeah.
Because I'm sure maybe you've probably read books about like the compound effect or slight edge, where a lot of people think success happens like one big jolt, but it's a series of compounded daily habits. Just like I'm sure it's the same with investing. It's not a big jolt right away. It's the consistency over time. If you could just talk about that, because in the show we talk about 3 phases: discovering your gift and developing, and then eventually distributing it. From the development standpoint, what is how has the power of the compound effect had on your this routine attitude that you have? How's it had that effect has had on your life, your business, and then how has the power of compound effect happened in your investing in the finance realm?
Well, it's interesting because they parallel. I mean, it often astounds me that anyone plays the lottery. I've even tried to explain to those in my family who continue to play the lottery that you do much better taking that $20 and put it in Carthage or in any investment fund than trying to win the lottery. You're much less likely to win the lottery than get hit by lightning. Substantially less likely. And the importance of that is that of what you were saying, that most of life is building, starting with what you have and continuing to build in a direction that hopefully you're talking to God and got some idea that this is where God wants you to go. The impact for me is that every day I learn something new. Every day. There's something where I can improve something about my routine, something about how we're investing, something about how we're looking at companies, something about how we're even thinking about the future. So there's no question that idea of building and growing every day, learning from the routines. You learn in the midst of the routines. People who have seen my workout routine, right? So it's astounding. So the leg press. Right now I'm at 1335, right? And so I'll put the weights on, and then it advances by putting, if I can get a repetition of 12, right, at a particular weight, then I put 5 pounds more on the next time I do it. So inevitably, someone will come up and see this rack, right, almost full, and then these two little 2.5 pound weights on the ends. And they'll go, "What is that?" I said, "That's how you get from 0 to here." A little bit at a time, moving along, keeping it moving.
That's good. That's good. So if you could, the last 2 questions I have for you, Dr. Phil, if you could tell others, or how does one make themselves valuable to the marketplace? Because you've obviously done that in multiple spaces, right? From the medical space, and now with your family in the financial space. So how does one make themselves valuable to the marketplace, to where they can distribute their gift or talent?
First thing to understand that as a child of God, everyone has a gift that is unique, a set of gifts that are unique. Those are inherently valuable. The challenge is, one, to learn every day. And now there's the Khan Academy. There are free courses from MIT, from Harvard, from University of Pennsylvania, from Stanford. Any of us can learn anything that we want online, any day, anytime. So and I got one of the best pieces of advice I ever got from a sociology professor in college. And this is when I was really being obnoxious, because I was a chemistry major, right? And the econ major was upset because the federal government was giving science and engineering majors higher levels in the government for summer jobs. And I told her, I said, well, science and engineering, we're just smarter, right? So I said, you pick any non-science course and I'll ace. And she made a mistake of picking a sociology course. And so I digress. The major thing is that this professor said, whatever you choose to do for your life work, make it something that you would do if you never got paid. That you just like doing it. Now, I have to admit, sometimes, so for instance, I have family members who are artists, right? And sometimes they need help translating their gift into cash. How do you get your art seen? That kind of thing, right? But increasingly, there are more and more folks who are happy to help others with the business part of getting their gift into the marketplace. And so I would say, encourage anyone who wants to give me a call. I'll happily talk to you and or refer you to a lot of my friends who were doing it. And I know bunches of people that can help folks make that transition.
I love that. So how can people get in contact with you if they want to learn more about, maybe they think, hey, I have a good business that could be you can consider for your portfolio, or something of that nature. How should people get in contact with you if they'd like to?
Well, you have my email. They can certainly email me. I'm on Facebook, Phil G. Lewis. You can catch me on Facebook. And although I'll warn you, if you get on my Facebook page, it gets a little hairy. We have some hot discussions on my Facebook page. But yeah, I'll happy to talk with anybody anytime.
Appreciate that. Dr. Phil, the final question we asked every guest on the show is, and you weren't prepped for this, what is the difference between one's gift and one's purpose? One's gift and one's purpose.
Well, any one of us can have one or multiple gifts. We can be very good at doing a number of things. But our purpose is whatever God has in mind for us for our lives, right? And he might need a multifaceted somebody in this particular space, or he might need somebody with one special gift over here. So that's where I tell people all the time, write down your life plan and then talk about it with God. Because in the end, it's where does God want you to go? That will be your purpose, where you should be headed.
Beautiful, beautiful. Dr. Phil, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing so much value and wisdom with the people. I truly appreciate you.
My pleasure, and God bless you. Appreciate what you're doing. Appreciate you.